Eco is a gaming masterpiece that immerses you in meticulously simulated ecosystems, economies, and governments with players in charge of it all. Join us in this exclusive Twitch interview with the lead designer of Eco to explore Strangeloop Games' largest update yet and get a first look at some things coming in future updates. Please excuse the hiccups, and thanks for watching. Jens is the lead designer of Eco. Eco was his official entry into the industry on a payroll. He previously did quality assurance volunteer stuff for the Swedish MMO Mortal Online. He recently released a sequel, and some other minor participations in support. Prior to that, he worked in heavy industry equipment sector on road construction and buildings. His high school and subsequent education was in the electrician field, which he then branched into IT programming, later on with a focus on C++, Java, PHP. After graduation, he spent about 6 to 8 months doing some PHP and web design, MySQL database work, but fell into the heavy equipment fun with driving wheel loaders. Did I miss anything, Jens?
No, sounds about right.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Jens, for making it out tonight. I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity. Would like to congratulate you and the team on a wonderful update. Everyone's been really excited about Update 10. People have been having a lot of fun with it. I don't think I've seen, especially the Twitch category has just really taken off. So the game has gotten really popular in such a short amount of time, and it's really thanks to the work that you and the team have put into this. So would like to start asking you, what prompted you to join the SLG team, and what have you worked on since joining in 2020?
Starting off, my introduction to SLG in general was Dennis, our community manager. I got roped into helping out on the GM side of things for White Tiger, and just generally started, doing bug reports and just helping out in the small capacity as I could from an outside perspective and so on. And doing a whole heap load of bug reporting and kind of helping out with reproduction steps for bugs and everything in and around. He reached out to me and asked if I wanted to join up as on the QA side. And that's kind of where I started. So I hopped in and did QA for a big chunk of time. And the more I poked and prodded at it, the more I started leaning in, which is general ideas and concepts for things and adjustment changes. Just kind of helping out. And I think this might be a big thing for general QA for, regardless if it's a program or, if it's a database management program or if it's a game and so on. Doesn't really change that much in terms of you're testing out functionalities and features, which then prompts you to look at how this feature is working on a whole interaction level, and then seeing and suggesting improvements and changes to these features in their not yet implemented state, and just tuning them to make them feel better and more useful. And from there, it kind of cascaded and snowballed from there into just general tech tree management and the whole balance part, and then onto general design as well for full-fledged features.
Very nice.
Yeah, and then during that time, I kind of came in. Keegan, the previous art lead, I guess, not entirely sure on specific title, because we have Milenko, who is our art director, and then Toby, that is doing a large chunk of that, the art the art management and kind of steering. Keegan did a lot of the design previously. He went on and ventured on and did continued on with his prospected career of doing like actual real life painting stuff. So like the whole kind of physical art rather than digital art. So he broke out and did his own thing, started his own studio, and kind of left the digital art space behind. And I kind of transitioned into his design role and took over from there. And yeah, it's been rolling since then.
Very nice. Well, that seems like you've definitely put in a lot of work on this, and I'm sure you're proud of the things that you guys have done. What would you say your favorite thing to do on Eco is?
Ooh, it's a lot of things. I think generally just seeing all the feedback and just going through a lot of it and kind of figuring out what can be used from the community in terms of constructive criticism and seeing what ideas they bring in and any weird things that we feel like, hey, this is going to be awesome, and then it turns out not to be so great, and we get a lot of feedback on it, and then kind of adjust and change it to be more in line with what works for the game, which is not necessarily always the case of here's an idea we have, shove it in, see what happens.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it has to be, entertaining. It has, the game itself is an entertainment outlet for a lot of people and a creative outlet for a lot of people. So we're kind of balancing that part between new interactions and kind of harder restrictions versus still having that layer of quality of life to make it enjoyable when you're playing it and kind of feel that you're getting what you want out of it without kind of restricting other people too much with what they want to do. So it's that tiptoe balance in between very different player community groups.
Yeah, that seems like it could be really difficult, honestly. And initially, it seems like Eco was made for a classroom setting. Is that still something that SLG hopes to continue while still maintaining this broader audience?
Classroom settings is difficult in terms of just hardware compatibility. As a lot of classrooms, and this is unfortunate for general Mac users, and I see Jordan is in the chat here as well. Hello. We have a general issue with Mac builds as of specific hardware setups because of how the changes in hardware manufacturing is going on with ARM1 and M1 builds. So it's difficult to kind of cater to that audience, which generally relies on Mac devices because of their simplicity and kind of their the general environment they're used in. They're less likely to use general PC custom builds because it's a lot more expensive. Kind of keep stuff upgraded and hardware upgraded, especially as things become more taxing in terms of that performance. So having that layer of optimization, kind of trying to push down general requirements to fit inside that really low end scale of hardware is at the moment really difficult. So probably not. But there are still some cases where this is being used for that purpose.
Really?
But it's also, it's bit of a shocker maybe to some people, but it has happened, and it's still kind of there's a few cases of it still being used. We still get requests here and there about if they could use it in a school environment or in an education purpose and kind of how that would work for them locally.
Yeah, I imagine with some of the changes, it'd be difficult, like you said, with the performance since it's already been a struggle. But I believe it launched on Steam prior to you joining the team, correct?
Yes, 2018.
Okay, so you haven't really been able to track how much the audience has shifted, but have you noticed a shift in audience at all with update 10?
It's hard to say yet. I think it feels like it's reaching a broader kind of casual audience, especially with the traction that we get on Twitch.
It's been
YouTube
huge
as well. It's hard to tell on a short span of time. But it definitely feels like we're reaching a general, more casual RP environment. Has a lot of strengths to that.
So it seems that Eco kind of has a more family friendly design concept where there's no combat, things like that. Are there any limitations or challenges with kind of developing in that direction, or do you not have any challenges at all in terms of that?
I think it's because of the controversial concept of you have a economical part, like a big economical and civic part, obviously, towards where it's, I wouldn't say nurturing confrontation, but
Right.
it does have a part of it that's it's seemingly rubbing that kind of antagonistic side of a lot of people that do like to push for a leverage of other people, or being that villain slash extortionist, if you will,
Right.
or kind of getting ahead of anyone, and being that top dog. That is a very it's a very core, um, very animalistic part of human beings.
Yeah.
Um, but with the complication that Eco has, in that it doesn't have any direct combat confrontation like you have in more general sandboxy build gunplay games. If you're looking at like
Right.
Rust and so on, where you could mediate with your neighbors, and I've seen this on a lot of the more active servers there, where people can build their stores and they have friendly relationships with their neighbors. Yet it kind of tends to resolve in everyone just blowing each other up eventually.
Yeah.
Regardless, as soon as you have the option to do so. Hence, with
Right.
Eco's core kind of principles being in the whole education thing, staying absolute clear of that has been very controversial for a lot of players, and been a course of a lot of frustration. And it's one of the general problems we still have with kind of player traction over cycle length, where instead of trying to resolve an argument, or instead of trying to resolve a dispute peacefully or amicably, they'd rather just quit and restart and jump on another server because it's
Yep.
quote unquote easier for them. But that in itself is also a big part of what Eco is trying to accomplish with its civic system, where you have all these tools to be able to interact in that manner, yet still resolve it peacefully, or kind of get around problems, or negotiate a resolution that fits the general audience. But it's a fine line to tiptoe around how much tools
Yeah.
the players can have without being too exploitative of other people in the game. But it's pretty awesome to see these communities kind of grow and get around these problems when they do arrive at them, and do resolve them in a peaceful manner. Which is also why the civic system is as powerful as it is, and as kind of defining as it is, with these hard set game values of you can set up laws to restrict whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean that it might be suitable to do that for all interactions, but you do have that option. And with the 10.0 and the settlement system coming into fruition, really gives you that granularity of, you don't want Bob across the world to tell you that, hey, you can't prevent people from picking up crops on your land,
Yeah.
or and so on, which has been the problem before with that global government system, where everyone had a vote regardless of where it happened, whereas now you can do super specialized local organizations and stuff that just wasn't possible before.
Kind of moving forward here, just before we get into the nitty gritty of update 10, I just wanted to ask, how many more major updates do you think there will be before Eco is ready for full release?
Um, Probably a difficult thing to kind of break down, but as per general, like, so the way we kind of structured major updates versus minor updates, although the 9 series of minor updates, if you look back over the general history of the updated quantity and type and volume, the minor updates of 9 has basically been major updates, essentially, because there's been
Right.
so much content that's been going into each one of them, that could have justified kind of a major version upgrade. But one of the biggest defining features that we have limited to major updates has been the fact that generally speaking, major updates have been something that we save up for things like bigger world generation changes to
Oh,
avoid general, like, oh, here's a new update, you have to restart your world. Even if you can migrate it, you still have to restart it because we've changed XYZ and how the layout is looking, or there's new ore types, or there's new animals that haven't spawned in your world, and you need those for XYZ material. Um, as an example, we had a headache with the cotton introduction in 9.4, because we weren't really sure how we wanted to treat it. We had a big Taylor update, and cotton as a requirement meant that old worlds wouldn't have access to it. But at the same time, it was kind of necessary to be integrated properly with the tech tree. So that kind of got rolled out, and the general advice was basically, this is how it's looking. Unfortunately, if you wanna, have access to it on your world without having to restart it, you're gonna have to use admin commands to spawn in seeds and kind of regenerate the layer for it.
right.
So you had ways to get around it. Now with 10, we introduced flax. We kind of were in the same predicament. However, we had that benefit of it's being a major update. So it kind of gets anticipated with these huge changes that you're likely gonna need a new world.
What was one of the biggest things that surprised you with how players are interacting with Update 10? Something that you just didn't expect.
Um, I think I got most surprised with how naturally everyone kind of settled in with the new features.
Yeah.
Because we've seen in previous updates when we've done kind of major overhauls like this, 9.0 was a huge one where I was still I was still on the player side, so I was just on the recipient side of things. But I was also doing GM stuff at the time, so I had a broader overview of more service and kind of general interactions. And that thing was astronomical because it changed out how the ore processing worked, and you had Arrestras as a new object. You had the whole government system that was in game rather than on the website. And it probably took people like 2, 3, 4 cycles before they kind of got into the loop of it, and really got used to these new changes and these new mechanics that were involved in interacting with the world. And for 10, it feels like, a lot of people have been rolling through the playtests that we had during the year. But there's been a ton of new people that are playing it. And everyone just, it just fit naturally in the world in a way that people just got into it right away. It's been really, really surprising to see how comfortable people are with the new system, even though it's completely foreign and alien to the old player base, yet still familiar enough that it didn't require this massive rethinking, even though you have a more confined space to kind of deal with the new claim system and so on. And I think that was really the biggest surprise, that it went so smoothly as it did.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a learning experience. I mean, for a lot of us, just I remember we booted up season 3, and it was just kind of we let everyone go to it and figure things out with the settlements. There wasn't a lot online at the time. Thankfully, that's changing. So it's been a bit of a learning experience. But you're right; people have just been really taking to it and rolling with it. Uh, One of my favorite updates with this. I mean, we're looking at the stars right now. We're looking at the asteroid. There's some fireflies coming across the screen. The graphics update has just been huge. It's been beautiful. Uh, is there any further plans to add more graphics to the game, or is this kind of where you like to see things?
Generally speaking, there's so if you're looking at the general asset upgrades that happened, and I see especially in the desert, I sat down I think half an afternoon with Milenko, who once again is our amazing Australian residential art director.
Excellent.
And we kind of broke down what he wanted visually out of the desert, and kind of went over like all the different plants, all the all the outcroppings, and kind of the formation of how certain plants should be clustering versus other that should be more widespread. Certain plants should just be kind of skirting around the desert into more greenery areas and higher moisture. And just kind of looking at it from a visual perspective first, because if you played prior to 10, you know that the previous iterations was the desert was basically a forest of cacti and Joshua trees. Like they the whole thing was just populated to obscenity. And we kind of sat down and just discussed back and forth, like how do we want it visually to be looking, and kind of go from there to making sure that the generation of the plants and everything around in there just kind of fits with it looking like a desert, yet still have a tingling of growth and usability for the players. Because you know, even if you want a dry desert and nothing's growing, it wouldn't be really appealing to players to get in there because they wouldn't have any resources to go for.
Right.
So just kind of see over what plants should be where, how they group up properly, and then they also went over some of the assets for them. Like those small little, what on earth are we calling them? Those little small ball cactuses.
Oh yeah, where the cactus apples grow.
Like the dwarf cacti.
Yeah, it's just been great. So the performance has seen a huge upgrade with this update as well, which is surprising with the new upgrades to the graphics. Is this kind of where it seems like the blocks and the way the trees render has changed a little bit? They kind of put less pressure on resources. Is this kind of where you would like performance to be, or is there still more work to be done?
Oh, there's a whole heap load of stuff to do. And it seems like my camera vanished.
Uh-oh.
No, there's a crazy amount of performance improvements that, there we go, I'm back. There's a crazy amount of performance improvements that are coming. The art team is going nuts on making sure that all the assets that we have in the game are kind of uniformly quality-wise as well. As the game has been built up from, I think the earliest code that's still in is like 2015 or something.
Wow.
So just like a quick rundown of like the project start is like 2014-15, and then going through the whole Kickstarter campaign up to release of the first alpha in late 2016, early 2017, I think. So there's a lot of these assets that have been developed over a very long period of time, and some of our artists are from that original team of artists doing it, and they've grown with the project. They've learned more, gotten better at what they're doing as skill sets develop over time. It's, I think, the unspoken hidden factor in general game development. It's like not all developers know the same thing. It's a personal skill set, and the same thing goes for artists. And it's kind of baffling sometimes where people expect the same quality, basically performance code, interactability in one game as another game when it's completely different individuals that are working on it.
Right.
So yeah, all of these assets are kind of coming in over a very long period of time. Some of them have not yet been kind of retouched and refurbished, like the if you're looking at like the tomato plant versus the prickly pear plant that you have behind you, there's a lot of things that are still kind of not yet really up to date in terms of the quality that we'd like all the assets to be comparative to.
Okay.
So there's a lot of these that are still under revision, and the same thing for all the work tables and kind of making sure the textures align properly and making sure that they, you're running at the same resolution for the textures for everything, and at the same time a nitty-gritty quality. And a large part of that process is, as with 10, Toby did a whole kind of upgrade for the textures and the ground mapping, which gives it that kind of depth feel for it, especially with like the stone road and some of the changes to like the wetlands, for instance, that we saw. So yeah, you know, as a TLDR, art and the optimization for that is a constantly evolving thing and something that keeps being worked on, indefinitely, basically.
Character customization seems a little sparse right now. There are new options, new hairstyles and stuff, but are there plans to expand character customization in the future?
With just generally more options, yeah.
Okay.
That's a no-brainer. I think the big part of the general avatar changes was we completely scrapped our old in-house build that was way too costly in terms of overhead, way too complicated for what it needed to be doing. So for the new avatar, we're using a kind of a package thing called Uma,
Okay.
and it took a long time to get integrated with the project, but it offers a ton more customizability from both the development side, but it also made it a lot more streamlined to create assets for it and to create more clothing and so on.
Okay.
So one of the things we just wanted to make sure for 10 was the whole thing is integrated properly, it works, and we have a standardized way of getting things from art drawing desk to being implemented in game. So my push for it for 10, making sure that it was done in time for 10, was just strictly stick to making sure that all the old clothing from the old avatar is adapted over and works with the new UMA system, instead of just scrapping all the old clothing and making everything new from scratch. So I just made sure that we had all of the old stuff kind of working and what people expected from and were accustomed to. So new options are going to be coming. We've seen a few with the Twitch drops.
Right.
And so more general clothing is things that are planned and coming in as we kind of go along. Part of it has also been like the whole bonus things for outfits, which has been a big controversial thing, and we're looking at some systems to kind of mitigate that, because people have come with great suggestions for things like, if you have a chef's outfit, then reduce time to craft cooking stuff or baking stuff and so on, which is that's all doable. But one of the reasons it isn't in that manner is because I also at the same time didn't want to turn it into basically an outfit swapping simulator.
Mm-hmm.
Because you'd run into problems where people were doing farming, they'd need to pick up the farming clothing, and then they were starting to do work orders for their chef stuff, so they need to change into a chef's outfit, which sounds great, but from a practical player perspective, it's a nightmare because you'd have to constantly change outfit every 30 minutes. Because
yeah,
you
that
would
would
need to
be a
do that to
nightmare.
kind of so we're kind of cautious on that. But that's kind of the main reason why we're cautious with it. It's not a matter of we can't do it, because that'd be fairly simplistic in just shoving in there. We've got like the hunting outfit, which isn't super obvious, but the camo clothing does reduce detection range for animals.
Right.
So that set do have a general buff. But yeah, so
Right.
there's some
Boots,
some quality of life
backpacks.
things. Yeah, those are kind of those are fairly simplistic compared to like full set. Well, basically full set gears. So yeah, we were experimenting a little bit with like mannequins, where you could just hot swap for a full complete set. So you could have like a mannequin in the kitchen with like a full thing that you just interact with. Press right click and just like swap all the item pieces for that clothing piece. So we're looking over some quality of life potential there to allow us to do like full spectrum benefits on wearables, but
Did someone
yeah,
send you my questions? Because you just hit the next 3 questions. The next question was going to be, about clothing utility. You covered that. And then display type placeables like mannequins and display boxes. Plans for that. So
oh
is
yeah,
that something you guys played with?
yeah, we're still, it's still kind of in its infancy with things like inventories that would display and render the stuff that's inside of them, like like a glass case for like a storefront or something, where you'd pop in pumpkins and it would pop up a pumpkin on it and kind of display what's in there for sale and so on. But there's a lot of prototyping, there's a lot of testing and kind of getting a feel for what works, what isn't nuking performance in some of these cases.
Yeah.
It's a constantly evolving thing.
Right. So one thing, and Test Game was in here earlier. I don't know if he's still in here. He came into my stream, I think during launch, and mentioned that he had done some work on weather. And one of the first things I did when I got into Update 10 was just kind of took away the UI, turned up the ambience, and just enjoyed the rain. And it was just so nice and so soothing and calming. And I have to know, is there any kind of plans for weather moving forward? More plans, maybe seasons, snow, maybe a winter or something that would affect plant growth, or is that something that's not really on the table?
Oh, it's tricky to say if, when, and how, because it's such a general broad aspect to it. But I've mocked up a lot of random scenarios and things, and kind of how they could be implemented and where they could fit in. And I was playing around with, if we, as I'm a gamer myself. I play a whole heap load of other titles back and forth, like delving in Farming Simulator and Factorio, and kind of a full spectrum thing. So doing things like soil quality or seasons and kind of more interactability towards the plant and harvesting and kind of the natural aspect of the environment. Seasons was a fairly dead giveaway of we have to explore it, even if it doesn't come to anything, or even if it's just decided to, it's not going to work, we're not going to bother. But at least poking my head in it and making sure that we've explored, if we can do it, how it would be used in case we would use it, and see how it would work in terms of kind of like seasons being, with the service being kind of cyclic. If it prolongs the experience, how would a season represent in terms of the time span? Because you spend 3 hours playing one day, and you might be spending 1 hour the next day, and then suddenly it's winter and you don't have anything to do. There's a lot of kind of player real-time translation issues to it. Whereas if you're doing things like Stardew Valley or something that has these innate things, you can just speed through them by sleeping through the season or whatnot. But when you're looking at something that has real-time progression scale to it, you wouldn't want the player to just be stuck and not be able to do anything. So there's a lot of complications there that might not be thought of when you're just looking at it like, hey, seasons would be awesome, seeing the greenery turn brown and yellow and going into autumn and then coming into like winter landscape and have reduced crop growths and so on. So there's a lot of things to investigate there and making sure that it would work within the confines of eco as a general experience. But it's definitely on the board there with kind of investigating and looking over how it could fit. But I mean, that said, you could probably do like a hardcore mod and go like, hey, you've got 4 weeks of gameplay. You've got the first 2 weeks are going to be spring and summer, and then you're going to run into autumn, and it's going to add moisture everywhere, and all the crops are going to die out, and then you have a week of winter before the meteor, and everything just dies.
We tried a speed run. It wasn't a popular idea. People like to take their time and build and smell the roses. So,
Yeah. There's
a little bit about the water physics. Water physics has kind of been something new with this update. The water looks great, it looks gorgeous. Is it currently working as intended, or do you see that there's more work that needs to go into the water and how water works?
there's a lot of things that we want to do with water to make it behave a bit more predictive. I think is
Okay,
the best term for it. Right now, it's kind of in between something of like a hybrid, close to like Minecraft, if you will, in terms of comparative voxel, like square-based voxel games. Um,
right.
Minecraft handled this very graciously with just adding infinite water sources all over the place.
Mhm.
Where if you line up a 2x2 square with water, it'll propagate and turn into solid water blocks, and it'll just spread that way. That way, they
Source
eliminate a
blocks.
lot of issues. Yeah, and for anyone being confused, if that's the case, so source blocks is kind of the originating point of water sourcing. So if you have a source block, you dig out one tile, water will kind of spread towards that tile in an evaporative state, so it'll decline towards that area. But if it's a source block and it spreads that source block, that means it's going to be completely filled up to the top and act like natural water tiles.
Okay.
And it's a tricky thing to do when it comes to verticals. And even Minecraft in its simplicity in dealing with it, it still struggles when you have larger, quick terraform events. Even for at this moment $1 billion $1 billion funded project, it feels like, with the updates they crank out.
Yeah.
But it's water is a tricky subject, because it's so unique in its behavior towards the rest of the environment and towards the interactions of it. And contrary to some of the other things, we don't have a tool to kind of interact with it. In terms of from a
Right.
player side, you don't have a
Like a
bucket to
bucket.
scoop up a water
Right.
source. Yeah. And it's a limitation that's in by design in a lot of ways,
Okay.
because we also wanted water to be logistically required to be dealt with in a natural way rather than just artificially create source blocks all over the place. Because otherwise, you could just grab a bucket of water, place it down next to your blast furnace, and pop down a pump there, and call it a
Right.
day.
Yeah.
You don't have to haul water in either an aqueduct or through a piping system from the ocean or from a lake or a river.
That makes
But
sense.
it definitely has some work. It definitely has more work to do. But I think the water from there was substantial improvements from the water in previous version to now. It's
Oh
still
yeah.
a little bit, as I see someone pointed out in the in the chat, with spreading like a virus in the basement. We
Yeah.
still have a few issues of where you might not see water, but there is a slight minor fraction of water in it. That's just not rendering properly, so that's a few bugs that are still happening with it. But we did change out, so blocks have a property to them, or like all block sets has a property to them, which is called waterlogged. And that is basically a state of
Hmm.
if a block can contain water data in it, while it still exists as so they're basically existing in the same cube. And blocks that will nuke water is your false squared blocks. So
Okay.
cube, and the cube, the roof block in particular across the board. If you're
Interesting.
trying to use ramps, if you're trying to use ramps and staircases and whatnot, they're not going to kill the water. They're just going to coexist with it. That allowed us to give the player opportunity to do things like ramps and more general dock interactions, where the water would then play nice with the block sets, because that took a lot of ingenuity from Grigori and Jordan to kind of figure out the back end side of things for that.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. And that everyone, you heard it here first. Roof cubes. That's how you get rid of your water problems, right? So, kind of looking at our biomes here, we've got our deep ocean biome. Now, this is something that's a little different with this update here. And one thing we noticed in the past season was that you can't actually use the fishing trawler in the deep ocean biome. You don't really get any fish from that. And in order to build like a platform or an oil platform, something on the ocean, there's a setting in the server that we found to where you can enable deep ocean building. Are there more plans to kind of flesh out the deep ocean biome to add more activities like deep sea fishing or anything like that?
Yeah, not necessarily like deep sea fishing, but we talked about having the trawler kind of interactively going and either having variable depth settings for the actual kind of net trolling.
Okay.
But it like the fishing trawler at the moment, and this is kind of new for the fish traps as well, and the crab pots. We integrated them with the general animal layer, which wasn't the case before. So previously, fish traps and crab pots would only catch things that are in their physical adjacency of, like, if you see a crab in the world, that's the crab that can get caught by a crab pot.
Oh, okay.
Now it's directly tied. It's still doing that physical, kind of catching it as it's coming in adjacency of it, but it's also working towards the actual animal layer itself to kind of allow us to regulate the yields and the kind of harvestability of these things in a more predictive manner, as a general like loot table, if you will. So we can set, how many times per minute it's going to try to catch something, what it can catch during those intervals, how many fish of whatever type can be caught, which then allows us to mathematically see how much, catch you can get over a certain amount of time to better adjust the values for it, rather than this completely pure randomized, which is generally bad for a lot of gameplay interactions. You generally want to have something like a pseudo randomizer, where it's not true random, which people might think is amazing. However, true random also means that you can always end up on 0 forever indefinitely if you're really, really unlucky. Because true random would do 0 to 5, for example, on each roll. But a pseudo random tends to be skewered towards the more times you roll a 0, for example, the higher the chance it is on actually rolling a catch on the next time. Which is a big thing in the general gaming industry when they're doing things like a randomized chance event thing. Where true random generally is really bad in a lot of cases. It does allow you to kind of look at total values and seeing over, you can run the event 400 times and see how much you can catch in that time, and then kind of adjust the values accordingly.
Like a pity system.
Yeah, sort of. And so those values are still being tinkered with and are adjusted, and the whole catcher system is still kind of being looked at a little bit. So while the reason why you might feel that you're catching a lot more in the shoreline is because you have more animals that are higher up versus the deep ocean, where they tend to sink down to the bottom, which is an AI pathing problem, which Casper is working and doing some significant changes to the animal AI and the whole animal system in itself.
Beautiful. That's perfect.
So that'll kind of force them to be more surface fish, and it'll feel more of a even catching rate, because the trawler does work the same way. It catches on a layer, but it also does physical catching. So when you're actually running over fish, you're catching that fish.
Okay. Yeah, that'll help out a lot, I'm sure. Yeah, we had some people last season like, hey, how come I can't use the deep ocean? So that's good to know that it's being worked on. Now, just kind of shifting gears, you notice I have the towns pulled up right now. Last season, we saw something that was a little bit different in terms of eco. Usually, eco's a cooperative game, but Culture Wars kind of introduced a PvP element. And it seemed like people started using this as a way to exert their influence. As you mentioned earlier about like kind of human nature, when people have the ability to do these things, they tend to do it. Is this something that the team kind of foresaw happening? And what kind of things is the team planning around this moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, we saw it during the playtest. Oh boy, White Tiger
Okay.
had some rough times during the first, I think, 3 cycles or something. We saw the Banana Republic just eating everything.
Yeah.
It was a true showcase of like a civilization game
Right.
where you start eating the small pieces, or one of those like like itch.io games where you just like gobble up all the smaller stuff and it just grows. And then when you get bigger, you kind of like swallow everything and just go crazy. Um,
Right.
and we saw that very early on with annexation and realized that it's gonna be a problem. And I think we kind of foresaw it as well with adding. So annexations and kind of hostile takeovers, if you will, are an unfortunate necessary evil in a
Okay.
lot of these in a lot of the settlements actions, because one thing that really stood out very early on with towns is that due to the fact that the civic system is as powerful as it is, means unless you have a way to subdue a town, you would run the risk of a basically what we referred to internally as a rogue town that could
Oh,
go out of their way intentionally to hamper or disrupt general gameplay. Might not necessarily be like an economical thing, but they could run like high pollutant machinery just to make sure no one else could run high pollutant stuff because they were taking up all the general CO2 absorption that the world could sustain, or they could just
right.
churn out pollution enough to destroy the world. So we wanted to make sure that you had a way to deal with it from a player point of view without admin intervention or so on. So you could deal with this kind of negative influence forces. Yeah, eco villains.
Yeah.
But it at the same time that also opened up the whole kind of can of worms of hostile players then had a way to PvP aggressively against other players. And over the course of whole kind of development of settlements, and especially from the playtest starts up to the end of it, has kind of been to deal with and figuring out better ways and better solutions to address some of the immediate concerns for it. There was a couple of safeguards features that came in at the end of 10 development cycle, and Armored Stone with his usual helicopters. Mandatory question.
Has a reputation.
But we have, yeah, it's always appreciated. But no, so for 10 we kind of chucked in a whole bunch of kind of mitigative steps to deal with it. Added some costs for it. Added a timer. Kind of subsequent. You can't just get annexed and then immediately secede just because you can. And a few kind of in betweens. For the next update with 10.1, it's going to be slightly thinner on general features, because it's mainly a bigger kind of polish maintenance update for like post-release issues that we've seen in terms of feature-wise. So added a whole bunch of more things for annexation protection. You've got the cost for annexations are now scaling based on population of a town. At the moment, they're just like a hard set. Hey, this is a one-time fee to annex a town. Doesn't matter how much the town is built up or how many people are in the town. Now it's going to be scaling towards the population itself. So you know, if you have a smaller country trying to annex a city-state, but the city-state has like 3 times the population, it's going to get really expensive for that country to try to annex it.
Right.
So it's going to be, you know, generally harder to annex things based on these parameters. It also opens up a few options for servers to just outright disable annexations for certain sections of it. So,
Okay.
you know, like a country can't annex a town in another country and cannot take things over and so on. So there's a lot more dynamic settings for servers to take in there to kind of help mitigate some of it.
Perfect. Yeah, I did read those notes, and I'm pretty stoked about that. I think it'll change. One thing that we kind of noticed last season was that it, like you mentioned earlier, players just when they run into an issue, instead of working it out, they just tend to leave and start fresh somewhere else. So we've kind of tried to implement some things on this server that have enabled us to kind of work it out and give people the ability to work it out and not feel like they can't. But I feel like that change that you're making with the annexation is going to help a little with that. So that's really nice to hear. Kind of talk about laws and stuff. It used to be that there was only one government, and you would have each cycle there would be a small group of players who would be exposed to laws. But now, since we have already, this is day 1 of the server, we've already got so many towns being formed, and so all these players are going to be working with laws, and sometimes these laws are it's a heavy logic system that can be easily messed up. Is there kind of a plan for a tutorial or something along those lines that will enable players to learn how to properly use the laws and avoid mistakes?
Possibly. It's as you say, it's a really, really heavy system. Eco law school PhD. It offers a lot of depth to it, but I think it at the same time, it's very, very programmatically centric in terms of its direct usability. But I think there's also a factor of I've seen more players get involved in the civics now that they don't have to be terrified of, you know, ruining the experience of the entire server just because they mess up a law that, you know, they want to do in their area. Because I've seen a lot of, you know, kind of horror stories where someone wants to add a district with like a road payment or something, or prevent placing stuff in a certain district, and then they mess up an if to a not, or you know, something programmatically that just throws it off completely and just and basically like inverts the law to make sure that no one can place anything anywhere, and so on, where they've been absolutely trashed by the community of the server.
Yeah.
For a very innocent mistake, which I think is a very sad thing to see, because you know, our GMs that deal with civics on a very heavy duty can do the same mistakes, and it's a very simple thing to do a mistake in, yet it can be really, really detrimental and super aggressive in what that mistake can cause because of how fundamentally definitive the game values are. It's like, you know, tax everyone's wealth in the next day and so on.
Yeah, but that's happened on season 1.
But having that secularity of, like, you know, whatever I do with the law system is only going to be influencing my little core group of people, and whoever comes and trades with us, makes it more approachable, because you're less likely to mess up for more players. And if you do mess up, it's generally only affecting your little group of you know, community and close-knit town thing. and it's allowed more players to get involved in it. Do we need to have more of a general kind of introduction to the whole government system? Most likely. We'll see, kind of where we're at. We've been kind of cautious with some of the tutorials and pushing for a lot of tutorial-ish things, just because there's so many parts that are still evolving with the civic system that we don't, we don't want to spend like 3 weeks doing a bunch of tutorials and then that whole system changes in 6 months, and we're gonna have to redo all that work to kind of make the new tutorials update and work with the new systems, and or not making sure that we're not giving out false information in terms of how these systems operate. We even ran into a few minor issues with inconsistencies with the annexation text in the Wikipedia. So just that on its own, with how quickly the content in 10 kind of changed over, how annexation worked from the initial draft of it to the end result, was so different that you kind of have to complete the features and then look at how we want to be, how we want to introduce people to it, and kind of the path. Because at one stage, having those tutorials are great, but it's also figuring out kind of how we want to introduce it, because unlike like teaching someone how to build things or teaching someone how to link a stockpile, we don't want everyone on the server to build a town foundation, because then you wouldn't have any towns forming. So it's kind of tricky to introduce something without forcing them to do something, which we see and with some of the tutorial segments that we still have that are a bit outdated.
Right. Yeah, that
so
would
it's
be
finding a good middle ground of introductory versus kind of making sure that it comes naturally to the player as they're exploring the system. So maybe have something like popping up notifications for when you're interacting with a civic object the first time, rather than forcing you to build it and so on.
I like that idea.
And it's and then there's also the whole kind of, do you want to have an interactability for that tutorial versus kind of doing a video showcase. We have a few tutorials kind of in between there, like the food tutorial. When you start out, you kind of click through it and it has a few slideshows and things where it's showing you versus where you can find things, which might not necessarily be taken to heart when it comes to something as really heavy like the civics, where
Right.
you can break down and go like, hey, this is how you create a law, and this is how you select different parameters for their subclauses, and this is how you create a prevention or a resulting action based on the parameters you've chosen, in a way that isn't just bombarding the player with information, because then they're just going to click continue, and just forget it the day after.
Right.
So
Yeah, a lot to consider there.
a lot of flavors and complications there. Yeah.
All right, so level with me here. Pets, yes or no?
Who knows? I mean, we've got animal
I'll take
husbandry
it.
on the board.
Oh,
We've got
that's
animal
news.
husbandry on the board that's going to be on somewhere. I did a sneak peek on one of my flowcharts for it back in somewhere during the 10 dev streams.
Oh, chat's going crazy right now. They want their pets.
Yeah. Like I said, Casper's doing a lot of work with the AI and the general animals. And if we can get them to play nice, we can do whatever with them, really. But a whole animal husbandry and kind of domesticating animals has a role in the vision for it. In what capacity that ends up being, we'll see what the future brings.
Okay. Now, I've heard, speaking of the future, whispers of an archaeology aspect being added to the game. Are you at liberty to share any details on that?
It's being tinkered.
Yeah.
There's
Are you able to kind
a
of like
lot of
let us know what that would look like, or?
Generally speaking, it would be revolving something like a different type of block interaction and finding it in the world and interacting with it and kind of pulling it home. We're still looking into if we want it to be in what scale we want how complex we want it to be working. If we just want to do something like generalized, like a specific animal, dinosaur type or whatever, and you interact with the block, and it turns out to be a velociraptor head, and then you need to collect all these parts to form a full skeleton and then have that on display. Or if we want the entire thing to be like, hey, you found a whole dinosaur here, or if we want it to be like a whole freaking block set of a full skeleton and so on. So there's a lot of things that we are experimenting with and seeing what's going on. And I know a lot of people have, some of the dev tier people have been looking into some of the source assets that's been added, and there are a few models that gotten some sneak peeks on. So hopefully we can keep some of it a little bit of a surprise for some things.
Okay,
but,
fair. Yes, only say as much as you're comfortable to say.
People are being very vigilant in what goes into the project through the code stream on the Eco Discord. And anyone that has access to the dev tier package has source access. So they literally have access to the source code and all the assets and everything. So, if they really want to find things, there is absolutely no hiding it.
I like surprises. I might be rare in that regard, but I do enjoy surprises. So you kind of touched on this earlier about cycles. One of the issues that a lot of servers experience is that once late game comes around, people tend to disappear. Part of it is there's a lot of like a dopamine rush that goes into being the first to build things. But once all the firsts happen, people tend to lose interest. Do you have any thoughts to share on this and advice for server owners who might experience this problem? And are there any things that the team is looking at for late game to kind of make late game more substantial in that regard?
It's a terrific. It's a good question because it's a really it's such a plethora of reasons why it happens. Mm-hmm. And as Armored Stone points out, it's a big issue with the community mentality.
Okay.
But it's also an issue of just generally, and this kind of brings into the whole community thing. Like it has a lot of issues related to what goals people have when they come into an eco server and what they want to accomplish. And I had a discussion with this earlier today with the server managers on Eco World as well, where people come in with a predisposition of, I want to be like the first mechanic and I want to supply all the steam trucks, or I want to be this amazing farmer that handles all the huckleberries. And then when they come into the game and their plans or their goal with what they want to accomplish in that cycle or in that playthrough gets they get gravel thrown in the cogs of their plans, and they all get foiled because someone else played 3 times the amount of time than they did and reached those goals before them, or they realized that, hey, I couldn't claim in the area I wanted to claim because it had the best farmland for this crop and someone else took it before me. So they hop in, they play for a bit, realize that I don't get to do what I wanted to do for this cycle, and then leave, do something else, and come back and or just immediately hop in on another server to try to reach for that goal again.
Right. That's something we've seen a lot.
Yeah, and Armored has a lot of experience with it, playing on longer term servers as well. Has some good points with, like, there's a general lack of need for money, for example. There's not a whole lot of general like repairability, maintenance stuff, and kind of like the prolonged consumption of materials. which is a tricky subject to kind of resolve. I'm looking into some maintenance stuff for things like world objects and vehicles.
Okay.
At the moment to kind of tinker with to see if, with dealing with kind of like spare parts and so on, like if you have like a broken engine on the truck, it'll run at like 10% the speed, and then you need to repair that engine or use a repair kit or have
That's an
lubricant
interesting
to make
idea.
sure that it doesn't decay and so on. So you have giving more economical incentives to keep things rolling, to avoid running into that stalemate of everyone has tier 4 houses. Now no one has a need for tier 4 blocks anymore.
Right.
A lot of servers have, especially for the longer ones, have been able to sustain themselves by a general influx of new players versus older players on the server leaving. So you have that new player coming in requires the same economical purchasing requirements as someone that's played on the server, but it's a fresh new requirement. So this new player needs 4,000 blocks and 20 workstations and so on.
Yeah.
And having that constant economical impact and constant economical drain and decay is a big part of keeping players interactive and keeping them interested, because they have to constantly supply more materials or just do stuff continuously to help prolong everyone's playability on it. And I think that would go a long way to resolving some of these issues. But at the end of the day, a lot of people just run it for the tech progression, and some people run it just because they have that meteor as their supreme goal. And once the meteor is blown out of the sky, they feel like they don't have anything to do anymore because the objective was reached, so they want to do it again. And that's also a factor of it, and that's kind of bringing into that part, and that group of people is very hard to do anything for, to make you can't really force them to stay in the game and play it, just because they've reached their goal, they've done what they wanted to do. And as I mentioned in the start, it's an entertainment source and stress reliever for some people and so on. So they go in it to have fun. Once their fun is over, they go do something else, or they restart to keep chasing that kind of dopamine fix that they enjoy to go for.
Right. Well, we're kind of running a little overtime on what I thought would my question, but I only have a few more questions left, fortunately. So these next questions are kind of geared more towards skills and skill trees, professions, that sort of thing. Are there plans to round out some of the professions such as composites and paper milling, kind of giving them more things to work with? I noticed with paper milling, there's lanterns now, which is really nice.
Oh, yeah.
But is there more plans looking forward for professions?
Oh, yeah. Paper milling has a few surprises coming. And
okay.
it might they might surprise a lot of people in terms of what they'll be.
Okay.
In few different regards. I've got a few plans for the next general content update. That'll bring in some of those, but yeah, so general fleshing out some of the professions and making sure that they are more all-rounded and just general like so kind of break down where we look at professions and the specialties in general. A few of them have been kind of placeholders for a long time.
Okay.
And that's been kind of completion over time, basically. The mining was really non-existent until 9, for example. Mining had absolutely no crafting. The only thing mining did was it gave you the bonus for like sweeping hands and tool strength. That was it. So the whole world objects and interactability and crushing materials and so on, that got implemented in 9. Prior to that, it was just like a usability kind of harvest skill. Gathering got some attention with the flax changes.
Right.
and got its first craftable with the cleaning up like the cotton plants and the flax plants.
The
Has
sketching
some more
machine or
stuff
whatever
that's
it's called.
yep.
Yep.
And it's it's going towards that. So I think we have a it's gonna be a mining related possibility for the next content update. We'll see. But
Okay.
for that, we've got I got some plans to deal with smelting and breaking up that skill a bit. And it'll be related to some recipe changes and overhauls to involvement into mechanics from smelting and kind of shifting things around a little bit. So I think a lot of people are going to be enjoying that. It's also going to bring some quality of life to farmers.
Oh, good. That was my next question.
General
Perfect.
sneaky thing. Now farming and harvesting and interactability with just general plants, crops, and seedability is probably going to be something that's going to be related to animal husbandry update, because it's going to be such a huge endeavor to dig into
Okay.
and redo and fix a lot of things. So that's going to be out there. But out of a direct practical thing, you're gonna be I think a lot of people might be surprised by some of the things that I have in mind that hopefully will make it into to a nearby or nearby is a gross understatement, but a general next kind of bigger content update for it.
Okay. Now,
But yeah, a lot of
in
new workstations coming.
terms of like working with, since we're adding more and there's a lot more to work with, do you think there'll ever be a way for players to sort of respec their stars without needing admin commands, maybe like through food or some kind of research based item? Is that something that you'd be willing to look at?
We had some drafts for it when Jean did some poking around and drafting and testing around with the education stuff back during like 9.2, 9.3, prior to when we really kind of dug into the settlement system. So who knows? Maybe there's some options there to kind of return to that investigation and seeing if we can get something sorted out there now that the whole civic system is kind of upgraded and settled, where because skill respec used to be a thing in eco, just
Right.
on the general skill system, way back in 7, so prior to just after launch on Steam, up to like half a year or something. There used to be a way to respec skills, which then refunded like half of your invested experience. But it had some significant drawbacks, because
Okay.
what happened was people would grab a skill and they would set up a workstation and a work order for, they grab logging, for instance. So they set up a few work tables, and then they set up a queue for like 9999 hewn logs in all of these workstations, and then they just respect. Now they had,
yeah.
a whole heap load of work tables that are infinitely crafting hewn logs, and they just switched over and changed profession to carpentry. So then they didn't need anyone doing hewing, because they'd have all their sources. They could just cut their trees themselves, and then they did the thing for the lumber the same way, and then they'd drop lumber, and then they would grab smelting, and they'd suddenly have infinite amount of hewn logs and lumber as long as they cut the trees themselves, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a mess to really work with. Players are smart, aren't they? They just come up with things that just like, oh my goodness, I didn't even consider that.
Oh yeah,
They just figure it
yeah.
out.
And as Armored pointed out here, it's like you could look at respec canceling any queue jobs related to the specific specialty, but then you'd have really weird, wonky edge case scenarios where what if that logger did a work party for someone else? Then it's not the logger that owns the work party. It would need to track all labor all over the place. And then someone could have paid that logger for that work party. Then the logger cancels their contract. And it just like kill all the orders for everyone that someone has been paid.
Yeah, it's a can of worms.
So yeah, it's a big can of worms and a real nasty spider web to get into. So it's one of those things where we might look at something like a hybrid system between what we used to have with skill points, where we would just have more need for specialty stars to kind of improve your profession more, to give you that possibility of like yackable trades, but it would increase the costs and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So the whole skill system is still kind of under evaluation as is right now. But as for general talents and perks, that's definitely something that we want to kind of wrap up, complete, and see if we can't get out of the way. We still have some work in progress talents. We also have some talents that doesn't make sense for certain professions at the moment, like the tool strength for gathering and so on. So that is kind of a big focus.
And I'm sure you want to add more professions when you're still working on all that. I'm sure that's kind of top priority right now.
Yeah, it's getting to a kind of a fleshed out state and making sure that we get the amount of workstations to spread out into the professions, making sure that the crafting, we have enough intermediary resources to kind of bounce in between the different professions. As an example, for one of my criteria for adding a new work table is somewhere between at least 2 to 5 recipes to make it a valid new introduction, for it to kind of fit in with the game without, we don't want to end up in a place where we need to add a workstation for every single intermediary resource, because this workstation makes sense to produce this item, but nothing outside of this specific item.
Okay.
But I mean, we could take like the carpentry table and break it up in 7 different pieces and have it as 7 different workstations. But some might not make sense at all.
Right.
So it's still kind of keeping it to where we want to push for each profession to be as kind of enveloping as the mechanics and industry professions, where you have a whole bunch of work tables. So each profession needs their own workstation / workspace, if you will, and have that workshop for each profession. But at the same time, each of these assets takes a significant time to concept up, get into game, have them modeled, make them fit with the general design, as well as having enough intermediary to kind of validate their use and their place for that time spent doing them.
Okay.
But it's something that's continuously growing and being expanded on for each different profession as we kind of wrap up and kind of consolidate where eco is in terms of content, but also in quality, and making sure that all the professions are as involved as the other, and kind of validate the amount of time you interact with that profession. Because at the moment, like fertilizer, you just have one work table. It's very uninteractive. Same thing with oil drilling is kind of in the same spot, where sure, you have the pump jacks and the actual oil refinery, but if you just place them next to each other and you have a common stockpile, it's you massively set up huge orders, and it's basically a fire forget. You place a store next to it and it's basically handling itself.
Yeah. So kind of avoiding some redundancy and unnecessary things. A lot to consider there. How many people is in the SLG team working on all this?
Ooh, we are That's a very good question. I keep getting that question and I never remember.
Does it keep changing?
No, it's more of a it's more of a it kind of fluctuates a little bit, but
Okay.
I think it's like it's around 20 programmers ish, and we
Okay.
have 6 people on the art team. I think 5 people. Toby
Wow.
will shoot me if I'm wrong here, but yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
We have a few people that are working like part time and not, some are not full time. And then we also have a couple of people that are former employees that poke their heads in and kind of help out and rummaging
nice.
around a little bit and helping with some feedback and just bouncing ideas back and forth.
Well, that's pretty much what I have for questions. Now, before I open up for chat questions, you shared with me a couple images. Is that okay if I bring those on screen and you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah. Since
Okay,
we were in on the subject of what's being worked on, what's being tinkered on.
All right. So what is this here? Looks like a lighthouse.
Yeah. So we have a spotlight that's pretty bulky and big. That's kind of locked into one direction things. But our team really liked the so they did a concept of I don't know if you saw it. It was during one of the preliminary streams that we were doing for 10 content. We also have it as the backdrop for the streamer overlays, where we had this like harbor town that was built as a concept, just as a paperback concept thing. And then our team decided, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could actually build this thing in the world, kind of spawn some terrain and kind of manipulate the terrain a bit, but generally speaking, like build this cool harbor town that they concepted up.
Yeah.
So they, the art team just went nuts on it and built it, and that's what you see in the main title screen.
Right. Okay, so this concept right here is in the title screen.
Oh, so one of the things that they felt were missing when they were doing it was, having an actual lighthouse light.
Okay.
So this was, I believe, and Toby can correct me somewhere here. He might be in around. Now he's on Discord. But it kind of got spawned with, they were doing the lighthouse that we see in the title screen and that we've seen on stream. But we didn't really have any rotatable light source that was actually animated and interactive. That fit well in it. We did some experiments for that, so you can see the lighthouse in the background there.
Yeah.
They wanted to have an actual light source that worked in it and kind of actually did its thing. So they were like, what the heck, we did a rotatable light for the buoys. So they have they have their like warning blender light thing going off, and figured that, hey, we could do the same thing for like a full scale actual lighthouse light. So that's what they're working on right now. So that's the concept image for it, and it's not plugged into the project yet, but
okay,
that is something that they are just creating right now.
Yeah, that's excellent. We have this thing that's kind of going on this server where the players build what we call wonders of the world, and it's just really inspiring structures. And last season they had built a massive lighthouse just stretched into the build limit, and it would have been so cool to have this light on the top of it. They were using torches, I think, or braziers to light it. But yeah, that would be. Now, the other image you shared with me is this right here. It looks like a bell. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this kind of came into after seeing all these amazing settlements that's been built on the playtest and around it, and people are building like these big town halls, and something that we felt our team they've been going freaking ham on all of these, like digging through all the different monuments and all the different big structures that people are doing, and like the town halls and the city halls and the country foundation buildings and so on. They were like, what's really missing? Something really iconical for like a central community gathering location, being these old bronze bells that you see in a lot of the old American towns, as well as like church gathering like church bells in when it comes to the European side, which they're more frequently used at, as we didn't really have the same type of. It's kind of weird when you look at archaeology, the architecture for like European side of things versus the American side of things, where you'd usually have these things where for summoning gatherings or alerting for danger or whatnot, generally leaning towards the whole liberal town hall meeting kind of collection thing, versus on the European side where it's old religious side of things, where it's mostly towards like church towers and
signal bells.
Yeah, basically. So that as inspiration, like, hey, we want to have this iconic way of really allowing people to distinguish what is a public building, and on the entrance to a town you should be able to really identify, like, hey, that is where all the stuff is happening. So they just went on with drafting up a concept for it, and started scrambling up and doing some assets for it, and it's turning out really nice. So a lot of these things aren't necessarily coming from a point of tech progression. We have to have an evolving way of just making better stuff in game, and leaning towards that, but also really digging into some of the more just decorative things, and just allowing people to build cool stuff as a if you want to kind of break it down.
Right.
So yeah, just a bit more general things that gives flavor to players to build with.
Oh, and we like flavor here, that's for sure. Yeah, that looks amazing. I really, hats off to the art team. I mean, they've just been knocking it out with this season or this update. All the art that goes into it is incredible, and I'm sure they like to see it in play whenever it goes live. So, Blizzard of Oz, other than animal husbandry, what other profession, if any, are in the works or idea has been tossed around about adding?
On the whole thing, we've looked at things like a unique like transport profession. We looked at a unique like builder profession and so on. That's been kind of tossed out the window because they just weren't enough to either warrant them, or they just would detract so much from the general player that it would be one of those, like, everyone would have to pick it to be able to do stuff, essentially. And those type of professions or specialty leanings would really just detract from the general creativity of a server. So some of those are kind of just chucked into the bin, looked at and just generally discarded. And there's been a lot of things in that section, like a whole like a chemistry thing, electrician, not just like electronics where you build electric equipment, but utilitarian pieces of it, so kind of all over the place, really digging around what is potentially useful, but at the same time still keeping to that criteria of it also needs to be keeping someone fully occupied through the playthrough, to warrant it being implemented, especially from like a cost to experience ratio of it could be hundreds of hundreds, if not thousands, of development hours going into making the assets for it, making sure it works in the tech tree, the abilities of it, and so on. So yeah, there's it's a constant evolvement. The same thing for we used to have a hewing profession. It got transmorphed into everything that basically. So you had logging as separate, and then you had hewing, and then you had carpentry. And then during 8, it kind of got, or 9, it kind of got smashed in with hewing got merged into carpentry, which is why carpentry was doing all of it. And then logging just had like, you cut trees more efficiently. Which then put carpentry in a super power position that we saw with, it was doing early tier furniture, it was doing mid tier furniture, it would transition into composites, and it did late tier furniture, and you basically had no purchase requirements for it. So I kind of broke up the hewing part of carpentry and placed it in logging because it made more sense that the logger was doing like rudimentary early furniture and some of the parts in contrast with like mining that was doing early. How did you break your avatar now?
I don't know. It just kind of terrified me a little bit being able to see inside of my own skull. But no worries, unrelated.
Unrelated, just sliding forward.
Yeah, it's just a feature. I'll just reload.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that's revolving back and forth, and we're still not to overuse the whole early access thing, but it's also using it very proficiently in testing out some of the things, reverting the stuff that doesn't work, or we feel that this broke way too much, and just getting that feedback and seeing how it evolves on a server, and seeing how different servers interact with the same profession, seeing different price scales or something just grossly overestimated and so on. So just tinkering around with it a lot.
Got a lot of questions rolling in here. Just pick whichever one you want to address.
We can grab the stockpile one. Dirt, sand, tailings, and crushed stone takes up a lot of space in stockpiles. Any plans on the table to put them in specialized stockpiles for these resources in the future? It's a general blanket no, out of a design perspective, because it was super controversial when it was implemented. But Eco didn't have world space storage previously, so it behaved similar to any other sandbox block games. Like you'd have all like dirt and block sets and everything was all stored in chests. And then during a transition over, it was kind of looked at and decided that, hey, it would be really cool if we could have like all of the bulky material that is carryable and things that you interact with in world space would be actually handled by storage in world space, which then meant that it would be a realistic set of storage for it, and reducing what's referred to as inventory compression, which is an unfortunate kind of necessary evil for things like vehicles to transport and sell, because otherwise it would just be way too encumbersome to kind of deal with. If you just could sell 8 bricks in a truck, I think people would get very tired very quickly if that was the case, having to drive forth 48 times just to build a room. But no, so the stockpiles kind of grew into its place, and they felt really, really natural when they came out. Some people were super against them because they were really happy with just having their 48 chests.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
I really love them because it allowed you to do a bit more visual appeal when you were building stuff. Like you'd have. It wasn't a nondescript chest with random stuff in it. It was, this is my dirt stockpile. I can see the dirt when I'm coming in, or I link it to a store and I can see, oh, I have a buy order for bricks, and suddenly when I come back to the game, I like, ooh, my 2 stockpiles are full of bricks. I can start building. So there was a
That
huge,
is very satisfying.
yeah, it was a huge satisfying aspect of it when you could really see the physical manifestation of things happening with your interactions rather than just a blanket, here's a chest, here's a random things to top into it, and you don't have to worry.
Right.
There's a slight part of that with the silos that I'm not super happy with, but it's something that I'm accepting as kind of a middle ground for the quality of life for farmers and gatherers, just to kind of deal with that bulk harvesting and bulk quantity of items. So many things in here.
I could pick one here. Regarding transporter profession, will there be delivery container kind of things like making packages with stuff to bring point A to point B by a person without stealing stuff? That's also something I'm curious about, especially for an RP server. We have people who want to do like shipping companies and logistical type trades. Is that something that you'd look at?
We started looking at it a little bit, but it's very, very undecided at the moment.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting subject to delve into, but it requires a substantial investment in checking through it and just going through and really validating it to a point where spending the appropriate time to really delve into and seeing if it would work or not, and how it would work and in what kind of application it in kind of to give it an honest test to see how it could work and if it would work.
Right.
Which obviously hasn't been done yet because the whole kind of year prior has been a full-fledged time consumption of settlements and boats.
I honestly think it's time well spent. There's everyone seems to really be enjoying it, especially the boats. Roll up here.
Is there a plan to be able to change your name without changing it in Steam itself? Name changes are interesting. I know Nid's doing to some shout out for Nid's toolbox and his amazing freaking server management kit that he made. Has been looking into like name changing and being able to allow admins to change names of players. There is sort of a way to do it with very hacky admin commands, but it like for the game to properly update everywhere, it kind of needs a server restart, and it's not completely clean nor safe. But it is something that we'd like to look into, I think, in just for on a server management side of things. As for a name thing, we started looking at, and this might be something that chat could pop in and speak, voice some opinions on, was to kind of have a username tied into where like for the avatar creator. So instead of it relying on your Steam name or your SLG ID name or whatnot, you would set the name you want to use for the character in the avatar creation. So when you create your character, you'd also give it a name, and then that's the name that would be used when you join a server, instead of, it would be completely decoupled with the Steam name.
A really good idea.
Rather than you risking having to accidentally connect to a game with a super inappropriate RP name for an RP server in this case, or you might want to be super sneaky secret and be a bit anonymous when you connect to a server because you want to role play something else entirely, and you accidentally connect directly to the server without thinking, and then bam, you're stuck with your ID, and you can't change it.
Right. It does seem like there's a lot of considerations going into place with RP servers, which is nice. I mean, as someone who runs an RP server, it's just nice to hear. I do have one question that I didn't get a touch on, because you did mention modders. Is there any mods that you have seen that just really inspired you and something you wanted to make a part of the game? Is there things that you guys are looking to do to give modders even more support?
I mean, there's lots.
Yeah.
There is absolutely a ton. See Alpenglow just popped in as one of the modders doing crazy things with mods in general. Yeah, there's a whole bit to modding explanations and subjects to cover, but I think a main reason why that hasn't been done yet, and very little general kind of official documentation for it. We have an auto-generated thing where kind of goes over the functionality and the just kind of how the scripts work, but it's also been a case of the whole mod kit is constantly evolving at such a rapid pace that it would be too much of an overhead to keep having to readjust the information constantly. So it's quite possible that there will be a better, more explanatory way for that information further down the line towards release, rather than we having to kind of spend time to update and fix it continuously, which is unfortunate because at the same time we do want the modder community to just go ham and go nuts with the powerful tools that they have.
Right.
But in some parts it is very unintuitive in some ways, but it kind of mirrors the civic system a little bit. It's got some super powerful ways of dealing with things, but at the same time there's just not enough introductionary things to it that really allows it to flourish. I think, yeah, and as Armored Stone points out, like mod keeps games alive, and that is very, very much the sentiment at Strangeloop, and myself as well. Mods contribute so hugely to the general gaming industry as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
It can really do some crazy things. And on continuing with Ace Wolf's question, with wish there were more kinds of vehicles, non-work related cars, for instance, for RP stuff. On the mod side, it's a little bit difficult because of our use of a third-party asset to deal with land-based vehicle physics, which we have plans to kind of scrap. So at the moment, we're using something called RCC, or Real Car Controller, which is a third-party asset. But because of the fact that it's a paid, it's a purchase asset-wise, that means it is under licensed use for the scripts and everything revolving that package. We can't export it as in the mod kit as is, which then is preventing the general modding community to use that, use those physics scripts to be able to mod vehicles. Now, dev tier users have access to it because it's a buy-in basically to get access to the source. So they can do land-based vehicles. However, the boats are completely in-house, so those can be modded and built as mods as is right now. But we do have plans to kind of scrap that third-party asset and just do our own physics for vehicles. And once that happens, modders can just go nuts on it and do whatever without the specific dev tier limitation that we currently have. Yeah, so that that's kind of where we're at with just general modding and the mod kit itself, as well as how it's interacting and the limitations with vehicles.
Kind of on the subject of trains, minecarts. I heard that minecarts were sort of They were implemented in the early build of Eco.
I wouldn't really say implemented. They were concepted.
Okay.
And there are some early images with them in it, but it was mainly just some prototype concept stage on it, and they're basically, they were basically non-functional and just like a visual thing. But it is a very controversial subject, and I kind of tend to stay clear of it.
Okay, that's
No, but
fair. No trains, everybody. No carts.
Um, get absolutely hammered. Like,
No
but
helicopters.
trains are the top elected and voted for feature. No, but the
performance.
performance is probably not too horrible.
Okay.
No, it's there is a difficult layer of complication when it comes to there are two types of people. Some people like trains, some people hate kittens.
What?
But what if you like both?
Right. Yeah. Can't they both be true?
So, I mean, if we really wanna kind of approach trains realistically, as in so there's a preconception of trains. You have to kind of split them into two different types. One is the whole, like minecart, very local logistics, and where you think of it as like an improved way of, instead of carts up and down, to kind of deal with your local logistics of hauling more material in one go and so on. The second kind of side of that coin is like full scale trains, and you have to kind of distinguish in between the two, because both are not equal trains, not even remotely on terms of involvement in making them happen, or just on the sheer scale of assets required. There's also a whole heap load of more complicated problems that would need to be solved prior to it. One of my favorite arguments when it comes to trains, it's usually like people can't even decide how to draw up a road district, which isn't even a tangible resource investment when it's just drawn on the map. And expecting you to agree and be able to build like a giant train network that costs a whole heap load of resources and involvement to do, and then you're gonna have like one guy driving on it, and it's gonna block the path for everyone else. Trains kind of trains are very glorified, especially lately with all the factory games that is coming out. Like
romanticized,
like
you might say.
Mentioned, but yeah, and there's this innate fantasy of trains will solve all my logistical nightmares, basically. But Eco is extremely reactive in its transportation necessities, because trains work in terms of real life scalability and usability. Trains works on the concept of you always have a set factor of input and a set factor of output that is planned for, pre-planned in weeks in advance in some cases, where you're always going to be hauling inside the same line back and forth. While Eco is extremely reactive in terms of you're not going to be likely to be exporting, say, 5 stockpiles of bricks every 2 days to town B. It's going to be, I have a whole bunch of things I need to transport right now, and I want to sell it right now because I need that money I could get from it to buy these other things at this instant. So if a player is then expected to, say, export it, you have a train station, and in case of the whole package thing, say you want to export it to town B and sell it to someone over there. So you send it as like a cash on demand package. And are people gonna be happy with waiting, say, 2 days of someone maybe picking up and paying for it?
Right.
Or are they gonna want to have that money right now? Which then opts to, why would they drive it? Why would they send it on a train instead of just driving back and forth twice with a car? Hence why trains kind of gets into a point where they're just basically glorified trailer trucks on a set track.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, even if the
There's a
player
lot
goes
of
inactive.
Yeah, and that's then that whole shipment is locked in, and you're never gonna see any of that money because it's locked in stasis where you can't get access to it because someone else has that package or permission to it, and
Right.
you're kind of screwed because it's in their inventory, and that's not touching on the issue and subject of things like if it's a track, are you going to be having collision? Because one of the things that trains tends to be wanting to be used for is automation, which is something we stay clear of as much as possible.
Oh.
Because we want the logistical part of the game to be a player activity. And
Okay.
if any part of the train is automated, you can then just eliminate that chunk of player activity, and that's a huge amount of both game time and kind of interactability with the world that you just alienate for convenience of the now. So with that whole, if you eliminate the fact that it's not going to be automatic, if it would happen, it would be someone driving the train. Then who would be driving the train? Who would be owning the vehicle itself, like the entity? Can anyone place a train on a track? Are trains going to be colliding? What if a player places a train in one direction and the other player places it in another direction? They have their entire freaking train carts filled with stuff, and they collide on the way to their destination. Are you going to be having people run out with a whole bunch of rails to kind of build giant circulatory road intersections just to have those trains be able to pass each other and spend hours trying to unclog that traffic chaos? Whereas what if we just have like specialized trailers in comparison?
Right.
That would fill the role of an improved way of dealing with logistics or higher capacity merchandise travel and transit. So there's the whole complicated part of, if trains are not fully automatic, which is something we definitely don't want to see, you have this whole list of things that are super problematic in terms of just general player activity, and moving away from a lot of things to it. Now, this all sounds like super negative and like, oh, we hate trains. That said, trains would work in a way, and it could work really, really fluently and really smoothly in a lot of these types of iterations when it comes to a server that has a closed community.
Right.
So if you have like
Where they
a
could work well
locked RP
together.
server, or you have a server where everyone is kind of agreeing on universal rules for these vehicles,
Right.
it would work perfectly, which is a lot of where the arguments for like, oh, we want trains is mainly coming from, because it would work really well in their environment. But that's not the general eco experience overall. And
Right.
it
It's
kind
kind of
of
a niche.
boils from, yeah, and from there it kind of boils down into into a very kind of sad cost value calculation for implementing all of these kind of backend systems as well as a rail system to deal with it, Making all the assets required and everything could be, months worth of work for several people that may then be used by like a percentage of the entire eco community.
Right. Yeah.
And
Gotta
if
be
that's
realistic.
the case, why not just focus on more polish, getting animals to work nicer, or having a better general, trailer truck that we started experimenting a little bit with. And then it kind of gets hard to validate the effort and energy and time required to put into making something like the trains to work to the rest of the community that is, they would never see a train on a server ever.
Right. Does anyone have any non-train related questions? I think we covered trains quite a bit here. Let me see if I scroll up and Dard had a question about education. We kind of touched on that earlier, so we'll go into that. Let's see. About universe-sized eco kind of stuff. Is this still on the radar for progression between cycles? LifeZone had mentioned a blog post from SLG about universe-sized eco kind of stuff.
It's stuff that's kind of in the idea realm.
Okay. Concept.
But it's basically drafting concepts and seeing what could work, what if and how. Basically, there's
right. Okay.
Nothing tangible to say there really.
Storms, earthquakes. Ooh, that sounds like a lot. Living ecosystems.
Yeah, general more disasters would be nice to see, but it's hard to. It's tricky to implement something that is approached differently, because something like something like natural disasters in general that would happen during the course of the gameplay that would do damage to stuff could have some really significant and above all else like random volumes of impact for different players.
Right.
Which is kind of like a high risk thing. Say, if you have like an earthquake and it randomly takes chunks and kind of reorganizes or destroys stuff on it, then some players would be significantly more impacted by it than others. And they're, you're gonna, if you're the only one on the server that has its house collapsed, you're probably gonna be very, very frustrated with it.
Yeah.
Without some
Why
sort
me?
of means to protect yourself against that.
Right. Mike had a question about animals attacking players. That was something that was once a thing, right? Animals used to attack players and it would take hunger.
It used to do. In 9 and 9.1. I think we nuked it in 9.2. So they used to attack players, and it was in such a massively uniformly negative opinion and feedback from the entire player base back then that we just completely scrapped and disabled it. Like it was uniformly, no one wants this.
Okay.
And that I think was in part of the animals are still kind of working a little bit shady in terms of they were kind of glitching around and teleporting and doing all kinds of weird things, and kind of how animals respawn and kind of show up in odd places and back and forth, up and down, was one of the main reasons why it was such negatively viewed, because it was unpredictable. There was no way to kind of anticipate how the animals were behaving. It would also scare the crap out of people, myself included. When it used to happen, like you had wolf that's making basically no noise at all, and then all you'd hear suddenly is like a roar, and
yeah,
while you're like casually inputting some labor in a workstation.
Then you're just hungry.
There was an iteration of animal aggression that was implemented, and it was kind of scrapped indefinitely. if it makes a comeback, we'll see. But yeah, even without the damage, the growls still scare me a touch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same.
So the animals used to attack you were the predators, I should say. The passive animals didn't really do anything. They mainly just grunted and ran away. But yeah, so like jaguars, wolves, so on. And the resulting was basically they took a chomp and they ate some calories and then they ran away.
Okay.
They can still growl at you and run away, but
It's pretty terrifying, honestly. Especially when I'm minding my own business and it's just snarling. Like, it seems like the audio level of the wolf growls or some of the growls are so much higher than everything else. Catches you off guard.
yeah, and on the audio level, I know Jordan has been looking into a lot of V-Vice stuff that we have some potential now that we can drop in some effort and investigate into. If he's still around, he can speak up on it in chat, but I think he might be crazy busy at the moment. So we, with some of the updates and changes to that particular section, we're looking into things like dynamic range for like VoIP and things.
Oh.
So we can do multi-channel ranges, things like global, whisper, shout. So you could have localized VoIP and in a more defined manner, which also includes like 3D space. So you can talk above ground and people in the in a tunnel below you aren't gonna hear you. There's a lot of things in that department as well that's being looked at.
That'd be nice. A little immersion, additional immersion there. Megaphone.
So there's it's someone is always working on improving some and all parts of the game, basically. If it's not audio, it's visually. Our team is doing a fantastic job at keep improving terrain and keep improving the visual aspects of it and textures and everything. And yeah, so it's continually getting more polished and more refined. Hoping everyone appreciates it at the end of it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you're kind of your team is a little overwhelmed with the reception of Update 10. I mean, for me, just on an outside looking in perspective, it seems huge. Just big support.
Yeah,
It seems like you guys definitely struck a nerve.
It's our biggest update to date.
Okay.
In terms of both backend upgrade, like system upgrades and overhauls, like on a scale in terms of like content and work went into it. Like the entire boats could have been its own major update. The entire avatar upgrade could have been its own major update, and it's all kind of got slammed into one, and it's absolutely astronomical in terms of how much that went into it.
Right. How long did it take you guys to develop all that and get it all out?
Oh, it's been going on in stages, but I mean, basically, since part of the staff has been working on it, in some capacity, from basically 9.4, 9.5.
Okay.
So some people have been tinkering on some of the features for it for better part of like 2 years.
Wow.
But the whole team has basically been at it full time for about a year.
Okay.
That it really kind of shifted over and everyone has been working on it completely. Outside of like the utilitarian systems, like the website of things or accounting and so on.
Right.
But yes, we reorganized and redid the whole interaction system for how it tracks how you're doing things and kind of different sections of the code when you're interacting with things, and which then caused a lot of wonky bugs and kind of surfacing of some of the old issues that people. So this is something that's peculiar when it comes to game development and just system development in general. So the old interaction system that we had in the game was super outdated, and it was basically a monster that's been just expanded and
Oh no.
kept being things added to it since the dawn of time, basically. And it's
Right.
had so much interactions and so much customized solutions for a lot of the gameplay actions, like cutting down a tree was the core aspect initially, and then it went over to being able to use a drill that fetched completely different data tables and worked in a completely different manner with what it needed to access, in the back end. And all of these bits and pieces have constantly been grown and added to it, where the whole prioritization and layering system, like if you're looking at a plant while trying to pick up a cart with different tools, where it still highlights the plant because you're always
I have an
able to
axe.
pick up. Yeah, but if you're looking at the beans, for example, you're
Yep.
holding log, which gives you that interactability of placing a log, but you're
Right.
still it's still a valid thing to pick up if you have a tool that's valid to pick it up. So in case of the scythe can't interact with it because the scythe's interactions are non-crops and so on. So
Okay.
it like the whole underlying system of what tooltips needs to be shown, and in which order things are happening, and so on and so forth. So that interaction system that we had has been, it's been piling up on different custom solutions for each different interaction case, to the point where it was an absolute spaghetti monster. So what happened for 10 was basically we took the entire interaction system that we had, that was a mess basically at the end of it, and just chucked it out the window and rewrote the whole thing.
Wow, that must have
Um,
been a lot of work.
and that was a substantial amount of work. But the problem with that was we then, all the custom solutions and all the custom small little fixes and tweaks and everything that's gone into the system over the years to kind of address all of these different things, had to be kind of rethought and reconfigured in a way that's much more cleaner, much more modular to deal with. Which
Right.
then made that we had a lot of basically infancy problem for a new system, for something that used to work, which caused a lot of frustration during the playtest, because you were having, people were running into issues where they couldn't pick up their cart in their farm field because the layering was off with the new system, as it needed
Oh,
more fine tuning and adjustments to make sure that each interaction were happening in the right sequence. So there was a lot of very, very, very important feedback that was coming from the community to find all of these different edge cases, which made the new system is so much more cleaner, so much more robust,
that's
and
nice.
it made debugging issues much more simple.
So like an
And with the new
additional
interaction
investment in
system,
work.
yeah, basically, chucking out the rotted old cardboard boxes that was holding up the old system, and input new concrete beams. So that was a tremendous amount of work that went into it, which you're not generally seeing as a player, because if the interaction system works from like in the back end, a player is never going to experience that improvement. They're just going to
Right.
see, I can pick up a tomato. Now I can pick up a tomato. What's the difference?
But it eliminates a lot of the hassle that went behind debugging stuff. So the investment of work saved you work in the long run, it sounds like.
Yeah, and
Great.
it's those kind of refactors and reorganizations that are critical to just keep the keep a healthy code to it.
Right.
But it's also, quantity of work that goes into that the player never really gets to appreciate, because if the system works, it works, and the player should never really see any of the nastiness of it. Which has always been a balance towards making sure that when we have these updates, to like that offset of balance between content that the player gets to experience versus system improvements, because we could chuck out, a whole heap load of like polish / refactors where we just massively improve the backend.
Right.
But then the players gets a little bit frustrated because, you're releasing all of these big changes and stuff that are breaking mods left and right, but we don't see any new content. Like, what are you
Right.
guys doing?
Yeah. I see that a lot in other games too. People kind of do that where developers are working on fixing the back end, but players aren't really privy to it and get a little frustrated.
Yeah,
Definitely something to
that's
consider.
always a hard balance for any studio.
Yeah. You had mentioned the feedback. Is there any bit of like feedback that you've gotten about Update 10 that has just been immensely valuable to the team?
Um, I think all of it, like just on a
Yeah.
broad spectrum, it's been so much good feedback in general. Um, that it's invaluable. And as long as it's somewhat constructive, it can be positive feedback, it can be negative feedback, it can be as for negative feedback in general, coming on and going like, I hate this new system, that doesn't really help anyone. So for a constructive feedback, it would be something like we saw with like the mining, the animations that I know Armored absolutely adores. Um, the just like pickup animations and so on. It's coming on with, I really dislike these animations. They're absolutely horrendous because it makes me less likely to do these activities over a longer time because there's so much more work to it, or they take too long to do them. Um, that at least gives us a point of origin to why this person is upset with this thing.
Right. Something
Saying that they're
constructive.
upset with it doesn't help.
Yeah.
We kind of need to have a point of origin to why it's a negative thing for them, or it's causing a behavior they don't want, and having that kind of explained really really helps in terms of us addressing the feedback or going revising either functionality that comes from that feedback, or um, sometimes it's just unfortunately sometimes it's a matter of like, this is something that the system is designed for, and this is kind of what we want out of it. We'll usually try to get to like a middle ground in a lot of these cases, but sometimes it's just a matter of fact of like, we want to see these things happen. These are the things they're designed for, and it wouldn't make sense for us to maybe work on B things if the A things aren't done yet. So
Right.
my world generation changes, for instance, since on the topic of new things and changes in 10, a lot of people were super thrilled with all the biome changes and all the changes to the ore layers and environment. Some people were very disgruntled with, they couldn't just open up an iron vein and be happy and just mine away all day and never have to look for more iron, or copper or gold, whichever biome they specifically like to kind of live in. But it was also a necessary change because like iron was taking up like 60% of the entire density of the desert in terms of
Wow.
height. And if we wanted to add another type of mineral or another layer to in the ground, we needed to compress and reduce the amount of ore in these biomes, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to fit in any of the new things. So if since we wanted to do like a major ore generation change, we figured we'd chuck that into 10 because it's a major update and it kind of fit in with the theme of adjusting some of these things together with the plant generation changes. So there was a whole spiel about that. Now, coupled with the massive reduction in ore, we also increased the general quantity of resources you got out of the ore. So even though you got less ore in the world, you're getting more, iron bars out of the ore that's in the world because of recipe changes, which might not have been super clear and obvious. But you basically have like half the amount of ore in the world, but double the amount of iron bars you get out of the recipes. So that's also a way to change the balance of something environmental without impacting the end. And I vanished completely from the camera.
Oh, you're still here for me.
I don't know what's going on.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm fading in and out. I don't know what's going on here.
We're losing you.
Ghost me is warping.
Getting Thanos.
Might be. Oh, I know what's going on. Tända lampan. Taklampan slocknade. The ceiling light turned off on schedule. That's why.
Oh.
But yeah, so that some of the fine tuning of balance might not necessarily just be like, oh, you have more ore in the world, so you can make more stuff. You can kind of balance things in back and forth with. You might need less materials, which then can be seen as a quality of life improvement for miners because they need to do less logistical tracking to be able to get the same amount of minerals. But you have more of a hurdle finding the minerals, making them more rare, yet still holding the same worth in terms of practical craftability.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like it's so systemic and all the different nuances that go into developing a game like this. So much to consider. And like I said, the update's been huge. People have been loving it. As Armored said earlier, what was it, like a 450% increase in the last 30 days? So I'm sure the team's really excited about it. One last question for you, more of like a personal question, I guess. I have some friends who kind of came from a similar background. You said you were in heavy equipment, kind of construction type stuff. And then here you are, lead designer of Strangeloop Games. What kind of advice do you have for people who are kind of starting from that area that you were in and getting into the industry?
Persistency is probably the best advice. If you look at just like general, it's kind of a little bit of a fallacy of the non-disclosure environment of the gaming industry as a whole. Because you're looking at like and this is something that especially goes out for like the indie population and so on with just development where the designer and architect and owner of Stardew
Right.
pushed out some good information and good interviews on the subject with like game development as a whole is a marathon. And from a player perspective and what you see when you're looking at a game developed from an outside view of things, you see maybe 20% of the time invested.
Right.
Because as I mentioned, Eco has been in development and Eco as a project started back in I can't right? Tell exactly when John, but the actual first code segments is like 2015.
Right.
Now prior to that, I'll go ahead and like presume that Keegan, Milenko, and John, that was coming from a lot of like they were working previously on prior to Eco, they were doing some other minor games for Strangeloop Games.
Okay.
some platformer thing, if I don't misremember completely, some math things. But prior to actually starting up the studio, they were working for like EA Games and like bigger AAA stuff.
Oh wow.
So, you know, they're coming from a huge, you know, coding / development background and had a lot of experience going into this project. But there's so many parts and so many things around it that isn't really thought of when you're looking at like, oh, I want to make a game or I want to get involved in game making, where, you know, Ico has been going on for better part of from start idea to basically implementation and to where we're at, where we are today. It's basically been a decade.
Yeah.
And
A long
that can be
time.
absolutely freaking terrifying.
Yeah.
When you're looking at it. Like Factorio, for instance, huge success. Took about 8 years, I believe. Might be
Wow.
slightly off on it, but yeah. So you're and that's, you know, if you're looking at it, it's like, oh, but it's, you know, it's a 2D sprite game. You know, it can't have been that much work into it. But they're insane time consumption projects, and persistence is really the key when it comes into it. But it's also it's also an important aspect of it is also you need to find something about it that you enjoy, because as with any work of any type, you know, you're not gonna work 5, 10, 15 years on something if you hate it from the start.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be a major thing either. It's, you know, pick something that you'd like with it, and really find something that you enjoy with it, and find a good reason to why you enjoy it, and you know, keep that focus on it, because there's gonna be, even if you're doing you know, like AAA titles and AAA studios can be really rough to get into because there's a really high competition for personnel for them. They usually have really high requirements in terms of you know, portfolios and previous projects, references, and all of these other things, and usually pretty high standards requirements for like graduates and you know, just general degrees and education backgrounds, where you're more likely to work on a AAA title through a subsidiary or
Okay.
through like a contractor, where a lot of these bigger title games outsource a lot of things that they're working on.
That makes sense.
And there's a lot of subreddits for just game development and game design, game development, and that whole thing on Reddit that has huge amount of good feedback and is a good source and pretty friendly environment to just ask questions and go over where to start and kind of where to get into and what to think of, and kind of the fall traps and the do's and don'ts of getting into that industry.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, you know, I popped in on Eco, really enjoyed the game, helped out from the QA side of things, and just, you know, did a whole crap ton of bug reports and being super active in the community. And then Dennis, out of the blue, basically went over and like, hey, you know, we need people for QA. You seem like a good guy. You're doing all this free stuff and keeping to, you know, the guidelines they have for bug reporting and all that. Like, would you be interested in doing this?
Wow.
And you know, anyone can do that. Todd, who
Right.
was our previous producer, also came in from a similar point. He started off as QA on Strangeloop and joined in on through like dev tier and did a whole bunch of like general PRs and like small tweaks and fixes that he sent in as requests and got roped in through that. So there is a lot of interest to. I'm always complaining about bugs. Where's my check? But there
Yeah,
is
you got to
there is
follow
a
the
big
protocol.
will, right? No, but there is a big will and a big emphasis on being involved in whatever project you might be interested in. Are you going to be likely to get, getting a gig at Rockstar to work on the next whatever title, GTA 6, without a massive education and a big portfolio of things that you've done in the past? Probably not. Doesn't stop people from trying to apply to it, or if you are a really, really good artist and you feel like, hey, the level of depth and details on these characters, I can damn well do that on my own.
Right.
There is nothing stopping you from throwing a couple of mock models in together and sending in applications, because I've seen people do that and have gotten jobs. So there is a will from that community and that industry to get good people and to get experienced, but also getting talented people early on, because experience is also valued. But at the same time, some studios are also just looking for raw new talents that might not be ingrained in a lot of the behaviors or the general industry environment,
Right.
to kind of just
New
like
habits.
teach up and get in there and get fresh blood in to kind of adapt and work better with what they're after.
That's great advice.
So yeah,
I'm sure a lot of people are going to take that in, and I mean that's one of the big things I believe in too. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. You got to put your foot out there. You got to show a passion for what you do, that you enjoy it, and you never know what kind of opportunities would be presented to you. Jens, thank you so much for taking this opportunity with us. The community appreciates it. I appreciate it. It's been a just treat to get to sit down and talk with you about all this stuff. Is there any questions that you have for the community?
oh no, it just keep up the crazy building and the crazy community building, and just we always enjoy seeing really cool stuff happening, and without the player base and the modding community and everyone around, we wouldn't be here today. So yeah, thank you very much for enjoying the game. Not a whole lot more to say to that. Can drop in. Hang on, let me drop in that. See if Twitch chat gets sad on me, but I can drop in the Kenny link.
I'll drop it because Twitch will block you unless you're a subscriber or
Yeah,
VIP.
Twitch goes like, "Ooh, you're dropping in a link. I don't know if I like that."
Yeah, you DM me. Oh, there we go. There's a feature suggestion form. Looks like.
Yeah. So the Canny is sort of a new thing to pop in. Similar to GitHub, it still requires you to use an account. I think it accepts like Google accounts or whatnot. But it's basically allowing us to do like feature voting and tracking, so people can go in and like collectively go like, hey, we really wanna see clouds you can walk on. And we can go like, yeah, that's probably not gonna happen, but we want to see what
eco fantasy.
Yeah, we just it's a good source of getting that feedback to see kind of scalability of the feedback, because it's very easy to get drowned in a few very vocal people about one specific feature, and then the silent majority enjoys the game without that feature, and then that gets shoved in, and suddenly the silent majority is not so silent anymore because they really dislike it. But that's also the curse of kind of features and suggestions in as a whole, with everyone that's happy with the game and everyone that's like super excited with the features that are in are usually the ones that aren't really speaking up and aren't posting reviews or somewhat. They're super absorbed with just enjoying the moment and enjoying it.
Right.
And that really helps as well. And as we keep saying, we keep improving, keep adjusting, and expanding on it as we go along. We got a lot of things planned, and still got ways to go, but we are constantly evolving. And as people that's been active on the Discord probably have seen the settlement feedback channel there, John has been going absolutely crazy and picking up a lot of feedback related to annexations and settlements as a whole, and been responding to a lot of players there. So even if I think I saw someone commenting with like, "Ooh, great that you're seeing this feedback and picking up on it and so on," and that's always been the case, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Even if we're not responding individually to each specific thing, we're seeing the generalization of a lot of these feedbacks and a lot of things that are coming in.
Right.
And if we happen to miss one thing, it's probably mentioned somewhere else in another suggestion here and there. So we are seeing a lot of the feedback, and it also has a bit of a time dilation effect as well. Like if we see a good suggestion, we want to do it. It might not happen in like 8 months, but then it's been posted 48 times since then, and people are going like, "Oh, they don't listen to us because this hasn't been done yet." Yet it might be in the works in some way, shape, or form, but it's taking longer because we want to make sure that it goes in the way we want it to. Same thing for things like, "Oh, this mod added this amazing thing. Why isn't this in the base game?" And that is that can usually be a two-part thing. One, it needs to be added to the base game in a very different way to make it work. Or it might also be a thing of, we don't generally want to infringe on the modding community's effort and labor when it's something that we might necessarily not need immediately for the base game.
Yeah.
Because it's not fun for a modder that spends say 100 hours working out a way for this system to work, and then adding all these 3D assets and everything, and then we just kind of come in and train wreck and do exactly that thing fairly similar, which then means that they've completely wasted tons of time and efforts they could have been doing another mod or something similar. So there's there's a couple of things in there as well. So whenever you do see a mod kind of get somehow ported into it, it's usually a fairly amicable relationship where we usually request and go ahead and say like, "Hey, we see that you're working on this and this and this. Here's sort of what we have in store for it, and just as a heads up, it might take half a year, it might take a couple of months, but we do have a few plans for this profession or these crafting tables and so on. So don't get surprised if what you're working on right now shows up in the game."
Right.
And then leave it
don't
up
get
to the decision of
blindsided.
the modder to, if they want to keep doing it, just to have it released earlier on, or so on.
Yeah, it kind of on that, like some of the games I've played, they come out with so many updates that the modders just get burnt out. Some of the mods that really make the game just aren't supported anymore. So I'm really happy to hear that you guys are cognizant of that over there, and are keeping that in mind when you're releasing updates. So I'm sure the modders appreciate that as well.
Oh yeah, we try to keep information flowing to them, and as with everything else support-wise in the system, if modders do, modders can always reach out to us if there's explicit things that they need access to in the core files. Like if there's a locked parameter that we need to open up and get an override out to, so they can use whatever they had in mind. That's something that happens continuously throughout. But it also hinges on, it's a two-way communication street. We can't anticipate what they wanted to mod, or in what
Right.
manners they want to do it in. So it kind of hinges on them actually speaking up and DMing Dennis or poking someone or talking about it in the modding channels for us to get aware of it.
You hear that, modders? You gotta be vocal. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Well, Jens, thank you again so much for this. Jens, thank you. I really appreciate this. And again, the community is really loving Update 10. You guys really knocked it out of the park with this one. Thank you so much. And if you ever have any questions for the community or me, please feel free to reach out, and vice versa. Chat, if you have any feedback, click that link. And until then, I suppose we will bid you good night.
Yep. Take care. And
all right, you too.
Happy to be on. And everyone, stay safe. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Yep, you as well. Thank you so much.